And here. All right, we'll let people filter in. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome for our latest author talk for the Wilmington Memorial Library Summer Author Series. I'm so excited to host Hank Phillippi Ryan tonight. Hank Phillippi Ryan is a USA Today bestselling author of 12 mystery novels. Hank has also won multiple prestigious awards for her crime fiction, 5 Agathas, 3 Anthonys, the Daphne, 2 Macavitys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She is also the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV. She's won 37 Emmys, 14 Edward R. Murrow Awards, and dozens of other honors for her groundbreaking journalism. National book reviews have called Hank a master at crafting suspenseful mysteries and a superb and gifted storyteller. Hank's novels have been Best Thrillers of the Year by Library Journal, New York Post, BookBub, Pop Sugar, Real Simple Magazine, and others. Her 2019 book is the acclaimed standalone psychological thriller, The Murder List, a nominee for the prestigious Mary Higgins Clark Award, the Agatha, Anthony, and Macavity Awards. Her newest book is The First to Lie, a chilling psychological standalone. The Publishers Weekly starred review says, stellar. Hank Phillippi Ryan could win a 6th Agatha for this one. I'm going to turn it over to Hank.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. You see, I held up the wrong book initially. That is really funny. So I do have The Murder List right here, which you are so right was not the only book nominated for every major award in Mystery World this year. So I'm really happy about that. And then this is the new book, as you heard, The First to Lie. So I'll be talking a little bit about all of that tonight, about books and television and the mysteries of each of them. But first I wanted to welcome all of you here tonight. It's so great to see you. How are you in this crazy, ridiculous time? I know we're on Facebook and I know we're in the webinar also. I can't see your comments on Facebook. So they'll be processed and sent over to me, but I can't see them when you put them up initially. So I'm so glad you're here and so happy to see you and so glad to see you, all of your participants here in the webinar at Wilmington. You know, it's one of the things, it's so crazy. This book, The First to Lie, came out, gosh, about a week or so ago, just a week or so ago. And, you know, it's just such an interesting time to have a new book. I mean, there's this crazy veneer of terror over everything, and everything is completely crazy. And last week when I was launching the new book, there was not only the terrible pandemic, but a tropical storm and power outages, a very high degree of difficulty for doing this. But the thing that gets us through this is the idea that we can be together in webinars and sessions like this. We can still talk and we can still chat and we can still share our love of books and reading. You know, I always say it's always safe inside a book. And that is why we are together this evening, and that is why our libraries and bookstores are still so important. And that's why we as authors persevere even in this crazy, scary time. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when the pandemic started, and I have a book due in 3 weeks, and I thought, well, I'll have a lot of time to write and I'll get way ahead. And that is exactly what did not happen. My attention span was off and my mind was off, and it was very difficult to write. And there's this sort of thought where I, as an author, thought I write entertaining, fast-paced, escapist. I wanted you to miss your stop on the T because you're reading my books. And I think how much the world has changed. And I wondered whether it was still important, whether it was still important to write the kind of twisty, turny psychological suspense that I do. And then I thought, well, you know what? Yes, it is. Of course it is. It's just as important now, if not more important. I chose to be an author because I love storytelling. I chose to be an author in the best of all possible times. And now that it seems like one of the worst of all possible times, doesn't it seem like it's even more important? Doesn't it seem like it's even more valuable to tell a good story, to let people lose themselves in the pages of the book? And you know, the thing about reading a book is that you can be someone else for a while. You can make someone else's decisions for a while. You can live in another world for a while. And that is why I completely embrace my writing and my reading and my storytelling. And again, why I'm so thrilled to be here tonight with all of you who I know feel the same way. You know, I've been a television reporter for 43 years now. It's pretty crazy. I've wired myself with hidden cameras and confronted corrupt politicians and gone undercover and in disguise. And I think it's that experience actually that led me to write The First to Lie, my undercover experiences as a reporter. And we can talk about that in a second. Just quickly, so you know how this all happened, I grew up in really rural Indiana. So rural that you couldn't see another house from our house. And my sister and I used to ride our ponies to the library to get books, and we'd fill up our saddlebags with books and then read up in the hayloft of the barn behind our house. And that's where I fell in love with storytelling. That's where I fell in love with mysteries. That's where I fell in love with Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. I mean, I remember, don't you, what the first time I read Murder on the Orient Express, do you remember that? And you think, how did Agatha Christie do that? How did she tell a story that would lure me in and have me at the end think, oh, I should have seen that coming. What a surprise. How did she do that? What a great ending. What a twist. And I fell in love with that architecture of storytelling, with that flow, ebb and flow and music of the mystery. You know, and I used to go to the library and look at those authors on book covers and think, those are real people who wrote those stories. Those are real people who made up those stories. And maybe I could do that someday. But the other thing that was in my mind at that time, even as a little girl, was that maybe it might be better to be Sherlock Holmes than write about Sherlock Holmes. You know, the idea of being the detective rather than somebody writing about the detective, being the detective. And I think as a crime fiction author and as an investigative reporter, I have a little bit of each. You know, my life turned out to be kind of crazily a combination of both of those dreams coming true. So as I said, I grew up in really rural Indiana. I went to a tiny high school. I think there were 50 people in my class. When I decided that even then that I wanted to change the world when I grew up, but that, you know, like any of our lives, that doesn't happen very linearly. So I went off to college and I majored in Shakespeare, much to my parents' chagrin. And they're like, sweetheart, you have no employable skills. There is no way that you're going to get a job anywhere. But after college, I went into politics, I hesitate to tell you, and worked for several political campaigns back home in Indiana. Sadly, not one of my candidates ever won. So that is sort of the time when you think maybe you should find another career. So as I said, I wanted to change the world when I grew up. I wanted to make a difference and leave a mark and have it matter that I existed. So I decided the way to do that was through journalism. So I got my first job as a reporter back in 1970 in Indianapolis, if you can believe it. And it's interesting because I think about Jane Pauley calls us the class of 1970. those of us women who started in broadcasting in the 70s, Jane Pauley herself and Barbara Walters and Leslie Stahl and Jessica Savage, we all got our jobs because we were women, and there was no question about that. But it's interesting because at that time we did change the world, and I'm really proud to be part of sort of the breaking of the gender barrier in broadcasting. And that day when I applied for a job and got it, when I was supremely unqualified to get it with no experience, I was brave and I was naive, and I thought, you know, this is something I can do. And I've been a reporter ever since that day. You know, that was a moment of bravery, asking for a job that I shouldn't have gotten and getting it, that led me to where I am now. And I've been a reporter every day since that day in 1970. And as an investigative reporter, oh my golly, you know, we found terrible problems in the 911 system that were sending emergency responders, police and firefighters to the wrong address thousands of times a year in Massachusetts. And we found out why that was happening, and we got that changed. We also found terrible problems in the mortgage lending and home improvement contracting system, so much so that 3 new laws were passed as a result of our story. We've gotten millions of dollars in refunds and restitution for consumers. We've gotten people's homes out of foreclosure. And that is exactly what investigative reporting is all about. That is, you know, that little girl who wanted to change the world. That's what we've done as a reporter. You can see my Emmys behind me on my shelf. And the thing that's interesting about those Emmys, I'll have to tell you, I won the 37th one a couple of weeks ago. And there wasn't an Emmy ceremony because, of course, COVID. So we were all at home. So I received my Emmys, not in a sparkling ball gown at a big gala event, but from the UPS guy who delivered it to my door. And I'm like, I got the package and I said, you know what this is? This is an Emmy. And the guy says, great. And I said, well, you know, this is an Emmy and I could open it and I could give you my speech. You know, how about that? Do you want to hear my Emmy speech? And he says, no, ma'am, you know, congratulations. And then he left. So that's how I got this year's Emmy. But the other Emmys, it's kind of interesting because every one of those Emmys represents a secret that someone didn't want me to tell you, right? Represents a secret that someone was trying to keep, and that I dug out and discovered and did interviews and did research and dug up documents and put together a story that changed their lives and changed my life and changed your life and potentially changed laws and changed the rules and made a difference in the world, all because of uncovering a secret. And that is exactly the same thing that happens in a crime fiction novel. In a novel like The First to Lie, everyone has a secret. Everyone wants to keep that secret. And that's the stakes. What will happen when those secrets get told? What are those secrets and who's going to tell the secrets? And how far will someone go to protect them? And that's the essence of all crime fiction, isn't it? I mean, that's why writing crime fiction is so similar to being an investigative reporter, because you have a character who you care about, just like in a book. You have an important problem that needs to be solved. You want the good guys to win and the bad guys to get what's coming to them. And in the end, you want some justice and you want to change the world a little bit. So whether I'm doing investigative reporting or whether I'm writing crime fiction, it's the same. Now, I don't take my investigative stories and make them into fiction. That's not what it really is. But every time I do a story, I learn something. I tuck a little nugget of something back into my brain. And then later that evolves into a thriller. And that is exactly what happened with The First to Lie. I told you that I had done some undercover reporting with a hidden camera. And several years ago, gosh, maybe 15, 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, a producer and I were working on a story about doctors' public records. And at that time, the record of a doctor's malpractice losses were not in their public record at the Board of Registration in Medicine. So I was talking to the Board of Registration in Medicine, and I said to them, if a doctor has serious malpractice losses, and I know that having a malpractice case brought against them is standard operating procedure, cost of doing business for a doctor, and it doesn't necessarily mean the doctor is bad. It just, this is what happens. But a doctor with a serious history of serious malpractice losses, that might be something that you as a patient might want to know. But back when we were working on this story, that was not easy to find. In order for a potential patient to know a doctor's malpractice history, they would have to go to every single courthouse and look up the doctor's record, which would be very onerous and quite difficult and almost essentially impossible. So I said to the head of the Board of Registration in Medicine back then, how is a potential patient supposed to know a doctor's malpractice history? And the head of the Board of Registration said to me, well, the doctor will just tell you. The doctor will tell you. The patient should ask the doctor, and the doctor will tell you. And I have to tell you that I said, no, they won't. You know, they're not going to tell us that. That's not going to work. And I said, we'll prove it to you. Let's see what happens in real life. So my producer, Chris, dressed up as my husband, and I dressed up as a woman, a wife, a young wife who wanted to get pregnant. And we went to a doctor's office to talk to him about this possibility. And I have to tell you that we knew this doctor had a history of serious malpractice losses. He had lost a lot of malpractice cases for a lot of money, and these were serious, high stakes, life and death cases, something that you would want to know if you were going to this doctor, at least to ask about. So you need to know that in Massachusetts, you cannot record somebody's audio, their voice, without asking permission. But their video is fine. You can take their picture without asking, but you can't record their voice. So of course, we went in with this. So here's how it worked. I dressed up, or down, I guess, if you want to call it that, with my hair up on top of my head and big glasses and no makeup. And I had like 3 sweatshirts on, and then a work shirt over the sweatshirts. And in the lapel of my shirt was, instead of a button, was what we call button cam, the tiny lens of a camera in the buttonhole of my shirt. And I'm telling you, it looks just exactly like a button. And then snaking down behind that little camera lens through a hole in my sweatshirt and down my back was a cord, the wire to the hidden camera that was stashed in a fanny pack that I was wearing. So my producer, Chris, and I walked into this doctor's office, camera rolling, pretending to be a couple who wanted to have a baby, to see whether he would tell us at the end of this consultation whether he had malpractice cases. Now that you know that you can't record someone's audio without permission, and I certainly wasn't going to tell him that I was rolling a hidden camera on him, I knew I had to get his answer to be dramatically revealed without him saying a word that you could hear. So at the end of this consultation, I said to him, just so I know, do you have a history of malpractice losses? Yes or no? Yes or no? Figuring if I sort of showed him what I wanted him to do, move his head one way or the other, that he would mimic me. And he did. And he said no. And I said, no malpractice losses. And he said no. And you know, that was just not true. That he just was lying to me. And we did that several times with several doctors, and not one of them told us the truth about their malpractice losses. And as a result of that story, the rules in Massachusetts were changed, and now doctors' malpractice records are public record in the Board of Registration in Medicine. And if you so desire, you can look them up. You don't have to, of course, but it is available there now in a much easier way. So that's not what The First to Lie is about, but what came from it is that doctor lied to me. That doctor absolutely lied to me. And that changed his life and changed your life. But I was lying too, right? I was lying too. I went in under false pretenses. I didn't tell him I was a reporter. I didn't tell him I was rolling video, but I was doing it for a good reason. I was doing it to reveal something that might hurt you. And so was that okay? I thought, was that okay for me to lie when it's not okay for him to lie? And I started thinking about the stakes of lying and the way the world gets changed and how we make that happen. And then I started thinking about that I had portrayed myself as someone else. And how do we do that? I had made myself be into a meek, little, worried, frail young woman who wanted to get pregnant. That was just not true in oh so many ways. But I had been that woman to him. I had reacted like she would react, asked the questions that she would ask, looked like she would look, behave the way she would behave. I was completely doing method acting. And then I started thinking that's what we all do all the time, isn't it? We all present a vision of ourselves. You know, I'm talking to you differently than when I would talk to my husband or my boss or a stranger. We're all being who we want to be to get what we want to get, right? For better or for worse. And then I started thinking, what if being someone else could get you what you want? What if someone decided that it would be more desirable, more valuable, more successful, you could be happier if you would be someone else? And that's when I started thinking about my book, The First to Lie. Now, Harlan Coben told me once to write the kind of book you love to read. Because if you're loving the book when you're reading it, then the readers will feel that passion through the pages, that they'll love the book in the same way that you do. So I don't like graphic violence in books. I don't like graphic sex in books. I don't like inappropriate language in books. So that's just not in The First to Lie. That you will not find that in The First to Lie. But what you will find is what I do like, which is deception and manipulation and gaslighting and mind games. Because I think psychology, the psychology of how we deal with each other and how far people will go to get what they want, that manipulation, that gaslighting can be just as powerful, just as deeply harmful a weapon as any knife or gun. And you have seen how that can work. So the problem though, with writing a psychological thriller like The First to Lie is that at some point you can't talk about it, because anything I say about this book will give it away. And it's gotten stellar reviews. I mean, Publishers Weekly gave it a star, calling it stellar. And all the wonderful reviews I'm getting are just so careful not to give anything away. But how do I talk to you all about this a little bit, to tell you a little bit at least of what the book is about? There's a thing on Twitter, which is so hilarious, which says, can you describe your book in 4 words? So I thought, okay, how would I describe The First to Lie in 4 words? And I figured out betrayal, motherhood, obsession, and revenge. Betrayal, motherhood, obsession, and revenge. So can you think about and imagine what that book might be? And I'll make it a little easier for you. There's a thing on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you're watching on Facebook right now, follow me on Hank Phillippi Ryan, author. Not right now, when this is over, follow me on Hank Phillippi Ryan, author. But there's a thing on Facebook that says, describe your book in 5 phrases. So The First to Lie in 5 phrases is a devastating childhood betrayal, an undercover reporter who's in too deep, a beautiful sailboat on the Chesapeake Bay, a rich and powerful family, and an ice pick that is not used for ice. So I can tell you bottom line that The First to Lie is 2 smart women facing off in a high stakes psychological cat and mouse game to get revenge for a terrible childhood betrayal. But which woman is the cat and which woman is the mouse? And how far will they go to get what they want? And who will be the first to lie? And that is what The First to Lie is all about. Sarah Pekkanen, who writes with Greer Hendricks, the wonderful psychological thriller, says book clubs will gobble up The First to Lie. And that is what I'm hoping too, because there's such a lot to talk about in The First to Lie, including how we deal with doctors and with the medications that we're given. How do big pharmaceutical companies who have a drug that will help so many people deal with the moral and ethical and financial calculus of the people that the drug harms? And what if you are the one who that drug has harmed? How angry would you be? How betrayed would you be if your dreams were pulled out from under you? What would you do to get revenge? And that is what The First to Lie is about. I can tell you that I have no idea what's going to happen next when I'm writing my novels. I don't have an outline, and I just sit down at the computer every day. I don't know what's going to happen next until I write the next word and the next sentence and the next paragraph and the next scene. So people say to me, wow, the twists and turns in The First to Lie, you really surprised me. And the end, you really surprised me. And I say, yeah, wasn't that a surprise? Wasn't that a surprise? Because talk about a surprise ending. I surprise myself every time. And that is one of the joys of writing. Sue Grafton used to call that the magic. When you sit down at your desk, and this is where I write, right here where I'm speaking to you from right now. I sit down at my desk and I just see what happens. I think, I can't wait to find out what happens next. And the only way I can do that is to write the next chapter. And I have to tell you, it's one of the joys of my life to get letters from readers who say, oh my golly, I read The First to Lie and I closed the book and then I opened it again to read it from the beginning to see how you did that. And I think about that little girl in the hayloft reading Agatha Christie, reading Murder on the Orient Express, and having exactly the same reaction, to read it again to see how she did that. And it's so sweet to me. All these years later, I didn't start writing till I was 55 and I'm 70 now. All these years later, thinking about that little girl in the hayloft wanting to be just like Agatha Christie. And then having, you see those teapots on the shelf behind me, those are the Agatha Awards, of which I've won 5 for my novels, named in honor of Agatha Christie, the woman who I idolized as a little girl. So you do see how things happen at the time they're supposed to happen, and how our lives are unpredictable, as we know, but connected. When I finished writing my first book 12 years ago, however long it was, I called my husband into the room and I said, sweetheart, watch this. And I typed the end. And then I burst into tears. I burst into tears because I knew no matter what happened after that, I had done what I always wanted to do. I had written this first novel. And who could have thought that that was the beginning of this wonderful new second half of my life? So I shouldn't have burst into tears at all, because it wasn't the end at all. It was the beginning of everything new. My second career, the second half of my life, and my being able to be here tonight in these crazy conditions to talk with you and share my book and answer any questions that you all may have. And I'd love to answer questions. First, let me thank you for being here tonight. It's such a joy to see you, even though I can't see you, I'm imagining you, to be here tonight. And I see how many people are here, and that's touching and wonderful and great. So I do want to say, find me on Facebook, find me on Instagram, find me on Twitter at Hank Phillippi Ryan, at Hank P. Ryan on Instagram and Twitter. We also have, with a woman, an author named Hannah Mary McKinnon, who writes wonderful thrillers, one of them, the newest one called Sister Dear. She and I on Facebook and on Instagram, every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 a.m. EST, we read the first chapter of a new book out loud, live. right? What could go wrong? It's called First Chapter Fun on Facebook and Instagram every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 a.m. So grab a cup of coffee or tea and come hear a story from Hank and Hannah. Who knows what new books you'll discover. And then you'll head right to the library to take them out, or right to Dick Haley Bookseller, who has The First to Lie, signed ones. I know, I signed them just the other day, just for you, all for sale. And so support your local bookstore, support your local library. As I said, it's always safe inside a book. And that is why we are all here tonight. So thank you so much for coming, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Hank. And so we are in the webinar style of Zoom. So we can't hear you, but we can definitely see any questions that you type. In the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Q&A section if you want to type your questions in there, and we'll get to those. And it looks like we have one to start. Hank, what advice do you have for anyone who has a lifelong dream of writing books but doesn't know where to begin?
You see, it's so perfect, Amber, and this is a great question, and I'm the perfect example of that, right? First, you decide what kind of book you want to write. I knew that when I got my first idea for a book, and as I said, I was 55 when it happened. I was at Channel 7. I was working on something else. I had a good idea. It suddenly just popped into my head. Long story, but it popped into my head. And I thought, I am going to write a book. I thought, this is the perfect idea for a novel. And I went home and I said to my husband, I've got a great idea for a book. I'm going to write a novel. And my husband says, great, sweetheart. He says, do you know how to write a book? And I'm like, how hard can it be? You know, I've read a million of these books. But I soon learned how hard it could be. But here's how I started. I had that good idea. I knew I wanted to write a mystery. And I typed chapter 1. I typed chapter 1. And then I just typed another sentence and another sentence and another sentence. Now, you may not, Amber, who asked the question, you may not think that way. Some authors have a big outline that they use to write their books, and they write this, you know, Jeffrey Deaver and Ken Follett. They don't make a move. Hannah Mary McKinnon, who I was just talking about, they don't make a move without having an outline. They know exactly what they're going to write. Those people are called plotters, and that's a certain way of thinking. But Lee Child, Charlene Harris, Sue Grafton, and I, we just sit down and write. We just sit down and see what happens and see what comes next. Dennis Lehane used to talk about, I bet he still does. Dennis Lehane talks about how a good book is taking a bunch of really interesting characters and putting them in a room together and see what happens. So depending on what kind of book you want to write, get that in your mind, the idea. If you can say the idea of your book in one line, that's a helpful thing to do. Two strong women facing off in a high stakes psychological cat and mouse game to prove their revenge about a terrible childhood betrayal. That's what The First to Lie is. All right, go. So you type chapter 1 and you just go and think about it. It's not like a test in a school. Nobody's going to read it the next day and say F or A. It's a big process. You know, you just give it a try. You can fix it, you can change it, you can edit it, you can tweak it, you can do anything to it whenever you want. You're in charge of it. The only thing I would warn you about is waiting and waiting and waiting. The only thing I would warn you about is saying, oh, what if it's not good? What if I can't do it? If you wrote a page a day, one page, 250 words, one page every day, by this time next year, when we're here talking about my new book, by this time next year, you'd be done. A page a day. So why don't you do that? Instead of thinking, oh, I have to write a whole book, that's going to be so hard. Why don't you write the first 250 words, one page? And then tomorrow, write another 250 words and see what happens. I promise you, I mean, I'm the proof that it can work. So good luck to you. You have to know somewhat of what kind of book you're writing and what you want to say, but then just go. There's nobody stopping you but you.
Excellent, great advice. We do have a question from Mary, which is, what is the name of the Facebook group? I know we've mentioned Facebook a couple times. So we are streaming live to the Wilmington Memorial Facebook group. And Hank, you had a couple Facebook groups as well.
Yeah, exactly. My personal Facebook page, Hank Phillippi Ryan, author, and there are lots of there's chit chat and pictures of my garden and the ducks and food and everything else about the world and other people's books, and it's a lot of things to discover on Hank Phillippi Ryan, author. You might be asking about First Chapter Fun, where you can come hear a new first chapter every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern from me and Hannah Mary McKinnon. And that is called First Chapter Fun on Facebook. So just go to that. It's a private page, but just ask to join and I will let you right in. Well, we're happy to have you. It's interesting. Today was episode 85. We have done it 85 times, and we keep an archive of all of the first chapters on IGTV, on Instagram, and on the video section of our page, the First Chapter Fun page on Facebook. So there are 85 first chapters for you to go in and hear and sample. And we describe the book and give a little bio of the author and explain the sort of setting and setup of the book. And then read pretty much all of the first chapter. So think of what a wonderful little super library that is. I mean, now, since we can't go to a bookstore, since we can't go to a library, and what you do in those places, just, walk through the stacks of the library and pull out a book and see if you love it. And that's hard to do now. It's harder to do now. So Hannah Mary McKinnon and I are thrilled to be able to give you a little bit of discoverability, to give you a little bit of a way to taste a book like a box of chocolates and see whether you like it. And it's really fun. Hannah is from Canada, but she came from the UK. And so she has this glorious British accent. So we give her all of the books that take place in the UK or Australia, or someplace with an accent like that, because she's so perfect at it. She just did Rhys Bowen and she just read Deborah Crombie. And I tend to get the people who are from the US, since my US accent doesn't do justice to the British accent. So it's fun and they're different, and we do a lot of suspense and thrillers and mystery and book club books and women's fiction and a little bit of science fiction from time to time. So there's absolutely anything that you could want, and all the big names and all the big books. It's pretty amazing.
Excellent. That sounds great. It's always great to have a nice backlog too of recommendations to look at.
Well, we get complaints all the time that people's TBR piles are now tottering,
Sure.
because everybody, we pick good books. We pick good books that the ones that we think you might enjoy. And so it is really tantalizing just to hear those first chapters.
Excellent. Well, while we're waiting for people can enter their questions into the chat. One question that struck me, Hank, is I know that many of your novels are set in Boston, and I know that you've lived with many places in the US, and I'm wondering if Boston, if the city has something about it that lends itself to a good mystery or crime writing.
Well, don't you think it does? I mean, it really, of course. I mean, Boston has so many neighborhoods. It's so old and so new. It's so historic, and it's so, there's something wonderful around every corner. There's the water, and there's the Boston Common, the harbor and the seagulls skirling over the water, and how it smells and how it feels, and the history. Think of the people who walked in the public garden or walked in Boston Common, and the gorgeous neighborhoods, and it's there's something for everyone in every place. And I've been in Boston. I've lived in Boston for since 1983, and as a reporter, I've seen a lot of inside of places that you might not have seen, underground in courthouses or inside prisons, or the rabbit warren of offices in state office buildings. And I've been to so many neighborhoods in my 30 some years as a reporter in Boston. I've been places I would never go, into people's homes where I would never have been invited. if I hadn't been a reporter. So I know the conflict, and I know the joys, and I know the difficulties, and I know how sometimes people are at loggerheads. I know the accents in the restaurants, and the sports teams, and the colleges, and the influx of students every fall in the real world. So yes, I think Boston is fantastic to write about. And also I think because I've lived here for so long, and because I know it so deeply and on so many layers, that's one of the things I love about writing about Boston, is that I can take my experiences as a reporter and my knowledge of sort of Boston, not just the geography, but the feel of Boston, what it's like to, the traffic and the weather and the controversy and it's all just, it's all perfect. It's all perfect for a book. So I love when people say to me, I feel like I'm in Boston when I read your books. And I work on that. I try to make my books. I mean, it's funny because, the books are so realistic. There was a time, I remember one day my husband and I were driving home on the Mass Pike, and I said, "Oh, this is exit 17. This is where Jane was chased by the bad guy." And then I think, no, I made that up. That happened in my book. That didn't happen in real life. So, so the authenticity is so strong in my brain that sometimes I conflate what's in my book with what happened in real life. So that means it feels real, right? That means it feels real.
Excellent. Another thing I was curious about, I know The First to Lie is a standalone thriller, but you have written some series as well, the McNally series and the Jane Ryland and Jake Brogan series. And I'm wondering how your approach changes between writing a standalone or an installment in a series, and if you have a preference between the two.
Oh, you know what? That is so interesting from the standpoint of a reader and from the standpoint of a writer. Yeah, those are such different things. It's really kind of amazing. When I started writing my first books were series: Primetime, FaceTime, Airtime, Drive Time, and that's a series, the Charlotte McNally series. And then there is the Jane Ryland, Jake Brogan series. I'm moving my screen a little bit here so I can be looking right at you. The Jane Ryland, Jake Brogan series, which also takes place in Boston. They all do. But the thing about writing a series, it's fun to write a series because you have your main characters and you know who they are and you know what they want, or think they want, at least in each book. And you have your setting. They are in Boston, and Boston's going to be Boston. And if they travel someplace else, it's away from Boston. So you have your base setting and you have your basic characters, and then you add the new people into each book. But a reader knows two things. One, that the series book is going to feature these main characters, Jake and Jane, or Charlie McNally. But they know that the suspense of a series book, the suspense of a series book can't come from the mortality of the main character, right? Because that Charlotte McNally is not going to die in book 2, because there's book 3 and book 4 and possibly book 5 and book 6. So the main character is not going to die. So the challenge for the author is to come up with a story that's full of heart-pounding, page-turning suspense, as I try to do, knowing that my readers know that Jane and Jake are not going to die. Now, see what I mean? How interesting that is? And you as readers are invested in Jake and Jane, I hope, starting with the other woman. And so you're reading this book knowing that nothing really terrible and not lastingly terrible is going to happen to them, because there's going to be another book. But in a standalone like Trust Me, or The Murder List, or The First to Lie, my 3 so far standalones, when I started writing them, I realized the power of a book that's one of a kind. In The First to Lie, you will meet Meg and Ellie and Nora and Gabe. And The First to Lie is the most important thing that ever happened in their lives. Of course, they had lives before and possibly lives after, but that's not what you're going to know. You're going to know this big, important page-turningly, compellingly, suspenseful story, the most important thing that ever happened to them, and then it'll be over. But the thing about writing a standalone is that anyone can be good, right? From page one, anybody can be good, anybody can be bad, anybody can start out to be good and turn into being bad, or start out to be bad and end up being good. Anybody can lie, anybody can be guilty, and anybody can die. Oh my golly, when I realized that in writing a standalone, that I could put everything on the table. And you as readers, you're smart, right? You know what we authors do. You know how we authors try to trick you. And in a standalone, though, you can have no expectations, because you know that I can do whatever I want to do. So I was telling you about how much fun it is to receive emails from people who say, I went back to see how you did it. And that's the fun for an author in a standalone, because you as a reader have no idea what's coming next. And you're smart enough and wise enough readers to know that it could be anything. So as a writer, I'm saying, watch me now. I'm going to pull the book rug out from under you. Let's see if you see this coming. And that's the fun part about writing standalones. So I am under contract to write some more in the series, but my next book that I'm writing right now, that I should be writing this very second, is also a standalone. And we'll see what happens after that. But it is a huge challenge and a huge joy, because in a standalone, every book has to be absolutely different. I mean, my book, The Murder List, which Dick Haley also has, is sort of a legal thriller. Somebody said, if John Grisham and Lisa Scottolini had a book baby, The Murder List would be it. And then, so that's one kind of a thriller. And then The First to Lie is in a different milieu. It's sort of in the medicine, pharmacy, big pharma, motherhood, family realm. Very different from The First to Lie, but still suspenseful, still a page turner, still a standalone, but different. So it's a challenge to write a standalone, but it is such a joy to hit it out of the ballpark when you figure out what the end will be and see that it will work. So it's really great. So that's a great question, because it is really a different experience to write each of those.
Yes. It looks like we have a couple questions in the chat. John would like to know, when you write dialogue, do you use dialect or speech impediments and such? And do you think that writing dialogue like that is distracting or enhancing to the flow of the book?
Oh yeah, that is such a good question, and such a toughie, because it's very situational. It's one of those, if I say, I did a big writing seminar last year, and I had t-shirts made for my class, and it said and they said, anything can work. My motto is, anything can work. Anything can work if it's well done. If you're asking me about my particular books, I think that readers are smart, and they don't, in my books, I'm just talking about mine, they don't need to be hit over the head with how someone talks. So if someone, I'm making this up, if someone has a French accent, I might have them say something in French and then indicate that they have a French accent, and then never say it again. Never say it again. I may pepper their dialogue with a French thing, but it isn't. I don't overdo it. I think readers understand this person is from France. They're in the United States. English is not their first language. They'll sound like a French person, and you know what that sounds like. I don't drop the G's. I have people say wanna and gonna sometimes if it seems appropriate for them, but not always. A speech impediment, no. If it would matter, if there's some reason, then I would figure out a way to gracefully tell you this person speaks in a certain way, and then just sort of let it go. I think every time, I like to write seamlessly. And so every time your brain snags on something, if someone says y'all every 15 minutes, I don't need to know that, right? I want it to be seamlessly a person with a Southern accent and just let you think of it. But then, I read Where the Crawdads Sing. That's heavily written with a lot of dialect, and once you get into the rhythm of it, it's beautiful. So again, it can work. It just really depends. I know this is not the answer you want, but just like in everything in writing, it's just so relative. It's so situational. It depends on what makes the book be a good book. So I have no rules. I mean, my only rule for writing a novel is that it has to be a good, compelling, page-turning story with, no tangents and no going off the, no tangents and no diverging from the plot, and no super long inner monologues, and no ridiculous over descriptions. But as long as it's a good story, where at the end of the book someone says, wow, what a good story. That's what I'm going for. Does that answer your question, John? And I'll do a follow-up if you like to be more specific about it. But anything that, if I can say this, anything that makes you notice the writing, then I don't want that. I want you to be in the story. I want you to feel as if almost you've watched a movie of it rather than have read it. That it's that the author is not present in the book. It's just the story. Does that make any sense?
Oh, I think so. And we do have a comment in the Q&A. Amber says the Murder List was a great book. So
thank you. That's
really
so nice,
worked.
Amber. Thank you.
We also have a question from Mary. Do you have a favorite place to work on writing your books? And do you have any rituals that you practice during your writing process?
My favorite place to write the books, Mary, is right here. This is where I work, and my screen keeps changing. Forgive me, I'm moving it every time. My favorite place to write is right here. This is my desk that I've written every single word of every single book. Well, not every single word, but most of the words of every single book. It's a semicircular writing table that my mom gave me, that my family had had for years and years. And it looks right out the window in front of me, which is right here, looking out over a big sugar maple tree and a big backyard. And when I started writing here, this was the only place I could really write, even though as a reporter, I've written in fires and hurricanes and snowstorms and at political conventions and with, water raining on me and in snowbanks and in the back seats of cars going a million miles an hour. But when I began to write fiction, I could only write here in absolute silence. Now, though, knock on wood, that the book thing is going along so nicely, I've had to learn to write other places. And hilariously, I've learned that writing on an airplane is one of my favorite places. You're in that container and you're going from point A to point B, and everyone is quiet, and they have on head earphones and they're watching their TVs and they're silent. And I have my little spot and my little computer plugged in, and I think, okay, 5 hours from here to San Francisco, I'm gonna write my words for the day. And it's great. I mean, I really wrote the end of The First to Lie on a plane. It was great. I knew I had to finish the book. I was flying to, I think, San Francisco. I remember I was actually on JetBlue, and I had my popcorners and my little Diet Coke and my table flapped down. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this. And I had the best idea. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And by the time I got to San Francisco, the book was finished. So that was quite the moment. A ritual, I try not to have rituals because I always worry that if I have a ritual, then I don't do it, then that's bad luck of some kind. And that's just such a complicated way of looking at the universe. I do have a rock on my desk, which is right here, which I'll show you, that says patience. And so I think about that from time to time. I have another rock that says imagine. So I think about that from time to time. What I do though as a ritual is I look at my word count, what I'm up to. Like right now in my novel, I'm on word number, I'm looking at for my chart here. I'm up to word number 76,473. And I write down, okay, I'm going to write 1,000 more words. And that's how many words I have to write for the day. And then I set a timer. I mean, you asked, so I'm telling you. Then I set a timer for 34 minutes. And I promise myself that I will not get up from my chair for that 34 minutes. I will not look at Facebook. I will not look at Instagram. I will not do the laundry. I will not plan dinner. I will not answer emails. I will not do anything until that 34-minute timer rings. And Amber, that's a good idea too, because it's very easy to get distracted, especially now. Very easy to get distracted from writing. So if I do have a ritual, Mary, that's what it is. I set my timer. I set my intent. I'm going to write this scene, and then I go. I hope that answers your question. We're all so quirky, all of us writers, and we all have our own little systems of how to sort of trick ourselves into doing what we're supposed to be doing. Many days I don't have to trick myself. Many days I'm just thinking, get me to the computer. Other days I think, maybe I should fold the laundry. And that is when the timer is necessary. Now I'm seeing something more from John.
Yes.
Saying, I think it's better to write good dialogue and let the reader imagine the rhythm of speech. Yes, exactly right. I completely agree with you. Just by, you're saying, after listening to your explanation, I agree that a stutter or an accent or writing in a dialect will slow the pace. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. If it slows it down in a way that's confusing or distracting or even sort of untoward and unnecessary, you don't need to do that. Think about how you can write it better without making it be different. It is who they are. This person is talking the way they talk. Let's hear that. Let's hear that on the page.
Wonderful. I'm glad we got a follow-up from John. One thing I've noticed in the pandemic, I know I personally, I've heard other patrons say this as well, have had a harder time reading and finishing a book. And I know part of that is I've found some more solace in kind of twisty mysteries and thrillers, things where something's not quite right. And you know, other patrons have expressed that they're reading more books than ever. I'm wondering how it's affected your writing process. Are you having an easier time writing, a harder time?
I have had, initially when the pandemic started, I had a much harder time. I will tell you, I had a much harder time. It was very difficult for me to focus. You know, it was just, my attention span wasn't there, and I kept thinking about other things. But you know, should I be going to getting groceries? Should I be putting stuff in the freezer? Should I, you know, what should I be doing? I needed to watch the news. I needed to know absolutely everything at every moment. And it was very distracting. Even my 34-minute timer was not working. I just couldn't get my brain to focus on writing or reading. Very difficult for me to read. I had a hard time even losing myself in a book. And as the days have gone by, I think I can tell you now that I've made 165 dinners in a row, just so you know. As we've sadly gotten into our new normalness, which I hope does not last very long, and I hope we're all back in the library and doing this together pretty darn soon. It's gotten a little bit easier, not like it was. I don't think it's ever like it was. And I talked to so many colleagues, writing colleagues, who have exactly the same situation. I mean, I probably, don't tell my editor, I probably lost a month where I just couldn't do it. I mean, I tried, but it just wasn't, the story just wasn't coming, and I kept thinking of other things to do, and very distracted. Were you all distracted? Were you distracted in your reading as well? It's just hard to focus. You know, our minds were sort of monkey minding around and jumping around. So I think I've had to learn to tame my brain a little bit, to find my footing again in reading and in writing. Have you, did that change you at all?
Oh yes, I know for me anyway, I have had my attention span feels different, even though I have more, you know, time perhaps to read.
No,
it doesn't
there's
matter.
not the time. I am so busy and so crazed. I will tell you that I started saving the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzles because I thought, oh, finally I'll have time to do these. You know, so there's this big stack of them now. I don't do them. I haven't had time to do them. You know, I love these Zoom webinars. I love talking to people on Zoom. I've taught many classes and many seminars on Zoom, and book clubs. I love going to book clubs. And so if any of you have a book club that you'd like me to come speak to, I'd love to do that if you read one of my books. So that would be great. So there's a lot of, my husband is a criminal defense attorney and he's working at home as well. So he's at the dining room table being in court on Zoom, and I'm in this little study working on Zoom. So it's a weird new life. We all have weird new lives. And I think we're all getting used to that.
Yes, I'm sure this book tour must be quite different from your previous books.
Well, it is. I'd be out. I wouldn't be in Boston. I wouldn't be in Massachusetts right now. I'd be flying around the country, in a different airport every day, at a different city every day, in a different hotel every day on book tour. That's what I'd be doing. So I think, well, now I can be here, I can be here in the evening, and I can be in California, later tonight, and I can be someplace else early this morning. And I can talk to a lot of people, way more people than I would have possibly in person. But there's nothing like signing a book to a person, handing them the book and have that connection, that personal connection. So I do think this will change how book tours are, and how all of us deal with each other in seminars like this. I mean, on the night of my book launch, it was boring. It was torrentially boring. I mean, it was horrible. And there was a moment, because it's all about me on book launch night. There was a moment when I thought, well, at least people won't have to decide whether to come to my party at Brookline Booksmith, because there's, oh no, it's raining. Nothing could be worse than rain. This as a library event. When it's raining, people have to decide to go out and get in the car, and their clammy umbrellas, and their feet are wet, and oh, it's so cozy and so much easier just to stay at home. So I was thinking, well, people will come to my book launch because they're just home, and then everybody's power went out. So there was that. All in all, it was still fabulous, and it was still great. But there's never a dull moment, no matter what you do. I mean, this whole thing has left us really wanting some dull moments, right? Bring on the dull moments.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Hank. I can't wait until we can get you into the physical library with your next book, I'm sure. And it sounds like you have another novel in the works.
I do. I'm 3/4 of the way done with the first draft. So this time next week, maybe I'll be farther along. This time next week, maybe I'll know a little bit what happens, but right now I have no idea. Now my process, and now like being where I am in the book. It's a scary moment. So we'll see. It has to work. Sometimes on my bad writing days, I think, I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know how to write a book. And then I look at those Agathas, and I look at that Mary Higgins Clark Award, and I think, okay, I felt this way before. I'm just going to persevere. And that's what I do. So thank you all for coming. Please come to First Chapter Fun. Please find me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and then we will see you. And buy my book from Dick Haley. This is Dick Haley, the bookseller, has signed books. You just popped that right up.
Yes, I popped it right in the chat there. It's at Haley Booksellers. We'll also have the link on our Facebook page and in the event page for this event.
And if you'd like a book signed personally to you, not just my signature, let Dick Haley know through this link, and we will make that happen. Or let the library know, and we will make that happen just for you. Thank you. Oh, you know what I always say, true, somebody's birthday is coming, or an occasion is coming. The pandemic cannot get rid of birthdays or the holidays. So a signed book makes a great gift, and happy to do that for you as well.
Wonderful. Good idea. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us and giving us a tease for what's to come in the first July, and sharing your story and your process with us, Hank.
My complete pleasure. Stay safe, you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.